In a city where corruption seeped into every corner, from the grimy streets to the polished halls of power, a group of men prowled with a singular purpose: to dominate, to crush, to remind anyone beneath them of their place. When they spotted a woman alone, gliding down the sidewalk in her wheelchair, they thought they'd found the perfect mark. She was small, unassuming, outnumbered a target they could toy with, break, and discard. They saw fragility where none existed, mistaking her quiet presence for vulnerability. What they couldn't see, what they couldn't possibly know, was the warrior beneath her calm exterior. Aaliyah Carter was no stranger to survival. Her skills had been forged in the crucible of war zones, her mind sharpened to a razor's edge, far keener than the predators circling her now. A former Navy SEAL turned elite federal agent, she had faced down terrorists, outsmarted mercenaries, and dismantled men far more dangerous than these street thugs who thought they had her trapped. To them, she was just another woman, another name they'd forget by dawn. They were gravely mistaken. The midday sun blazed overhead, casting stark shadows across the bustling city sidewalk as Aaliyah rolled forward with steady precision. Her posture was relaxed yet composed, her face a mask of unreadable calm. Around her, the urban pulse thrummed, commuters darted past, heads bowed over glowing screens. Street vendors hawked their lunch specials with practiced cadence, and the occasional blare of a car horn cut through the din. To the untrained eye, this was just another chaotic afternoon in the city, but Aaliyah Carter was no ordinary passerby. She had sensed the danger the moment she exited the FBI headquarters, long before the men made their presence overt. A seasoned soldier didn't need to see a threat to feel its weight. The air had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The rhythm of the crowd slowed, footsteps lingered too long, and the heavy gaze of predators settled on her like a spotlight. She caught their reflection in the glass of a storefront window, three men slipping out from an alley across the street, their eyes locking onto her with predatory focus. Moments later, two more emerged from the opposite direction, fanning out in a way that might seem casual to an untrained observer. But Aaliyah saw the coordination in their movements, the deliberate positioning as they closed in. She didn't flinch, didn't reach for her phone or alter her course. If they thought she was unaware, they'd get careless, and she wanted them careless. The leader, a lean man with a shaved head and pale blue eyes that glinted with malice, stepped directly into her path, forcing her to halt, his grin stretched too wide, revealing yellowed teeth stained by years of tobacco. Tattoos snaked across his forearms. But one mark on his collarbone caught her eye, a black sun symbol. A chilling emblem she recognized instantly, white supremacist insignia. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with mock amusement. Didn't expect to see someone like you rolling through here all by your lonesome. Aaliyah remained still, her silence inviting him to keep talking. The taller man to her right, broad and hulking, let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. She's real quiet. Thinks she's too good to even speak to us. The youngest of the group, wiry and twitchy, with a glint of cruelty in his eyes, scoffed. Nah, she's just banking on that special treatment people like her always get, right? The fourth, a stocky man with shoulders like a linebacker, sneered, his voice thick with contempt. What? You think that fancy chair makes you untouchable? That folks are going to cry for you if something goes down? The leader leaned in closer, his grin widening into something feral. Maybe we ought to show you how the world really works. The moment his hand darted toward her, Aaliyah sprang into action, her fingers clamped onto his wrist with lightning precision, twisting it in a fluid motion. A sharp crack split the air as his arm buckled, pain ripping a yelp from his throat. He stumbled forward, off balance, and Aaliyah used his momentum against him, yanking him past her and sending him sprawling onto the pavement. The others reacted instantly. The broad-shouldered man lunged from her right, aiming to seize her from behind. Aaliyah spun her wheelchair, the reinforced metal frame slamming into his knee with a sickening crunch. He howled, collapsing onto one leg as agony contorted his face. Another grabbed at the back of her chair, but she was ready. She seized his wrist, yanked downward, and sent him crashing face first into the concrete with a heavy thud. The leader scrambled to his feet, eyes blazing with humiliated rage. "You piece of—" he snarled, rushing her again. Aaliyah waited until the last possible second, then jerked her chair back, rolling just enough to make him overextend. As his momentum carried him forward, she drove her elbow into his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. He crumpled, coughing violently, clutching his side. "Get her," one of the others barked. The remaining two hesitated for a heartbeat before charging together, their movements fueled by anger and wounded pride. Aaliyah's grip on her wheelchair tightened, her breath steady despite the chaos. The gang surrounded her now, their confidence is shaken but their fury burning hotter. The leader wiped blood from his lip, his pale eyes dark with venom. "Think you're tough?" "Huh," he spat, his voice raw with hatred. The broad-shouldered man, still clutching his shattered knee, glared at her, his pain eclipsed by seething rage. "Let's show her what happens when you cross the wrong people," he growled. "Circle her," the leader ordered, and the others obeyed, tightening their formation to cut off any escape. They were adapting, learning from their earlier mistakes. Two positioned themselves behind her, blocking her retreat, while the broad-shouldered man limped to her left, his injured leg dragging, but his determination unbroken. The leader stood in front, flexing his fingers as if shaking off the pain. Aaliyah's mind raced, calculating every angle, every possibility. She wasn't about to let them dictate the fight. The youngest made the first move, darting in from behind. She heard the shuffle of his feet, the telltale shift of weight before a strike. As his arms reached for her, she ducked low and whipped her chair to the right, driving the frame into his ribs with brutal force. He grunted, stumbling sideways and crashing into the brick wall of a nearby building. The second attacker tried to capitalize, reaching for her shoulder. She let him get close, just close enough before trapping his wrist, twisting sharply, and flipping him over her lap. He hit the ground hard, the air rushing from his lungs in a wheeze. The leader seized the moment, lunging with newfound purpose. Aaliyah had expected hesitation, but he moved faster this time, his hands slamming onto the arms of her wheelchair, gripping tight. Not this time. He hissed through gritted teeth. Aaliyah reacted instantly, her hand shooting forward to strike his throat, not hard enough to crush his windpipe, but enough to make him gag and loosen his hold. She pushed off, creating just enough space to maneuver, but the broad-shouldered man was already closing in. His injured knee slowed him, his breath coming in ragged bursts, but his sheer mass made him a threat. He swung a wild punch, his fist like a sledgehammer. Aaliyah blocked it with her forearm, the impact reverberating through her bones. He was strong, dangerously so, but he was reckless, his frustration making him sloppy. He grabbed for her again, veins bulging in his neck as he roared. Aaliyah didn't give him a second chance. She threw her weight into a controlled spin, angling her chair so the reinforced footplate smashed into his shin. Bone met metal with a gruesome crack, and he let out a strangled cry, stumbling back. His knee buckled, and he nearly collapsed, catching himself on the rusted edge of a dumpster. She could end this. She would end this. Then a sharp metallic snick sliced through the air. Aaliyah's head snapped toward the sound. The leader, his sunken cheeks taut, and his smirk now a twisted grimace, held a switchblade in his right hand. He flipped it between his fingers with unsettling ease, the small but deadly blade catching the sunlight. His eyes, dark and unyielding, gleamed with a sadistic edge. "You've had your fun," he said, his voice low and steady, bolstered by the weapon in his grasp. "Now let's see how tough you are when you're bleeding out." The others grinned, their confidence surging. The gangly one in a mismatched hoodie let out a nervous chuckle, his earlier fear masked by false bravado. The short one, with a jagged scar along his jaw, cracked his knuckles, his grin wide and hungry. They thought the knife had shifted the balance. The broad-shouldered man, steadying himself against the dumpster, sneered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just gut her already," he muttered. Aaliyah shifted slightly, her eyes locked on the blade. If he thought a knife would make her flinch, he was dead wrong. The youngest of the group, still panting from the chase, froze in place, His wide brown eyes flicked nervously between Aaliyah and the gleaming knife clutched in her hand, a silent storm of doubt swirling behind his gaze. He shuffled back half a step, his body screaming he wasn't ready for this to escalate. Aaliyah seized the moment's hesitation, her fingers tightening around the knife's handle. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating her next move. If these thugs thought they had her cornered, they were about to discover just how badly they'd misjudged her. The leader lunged first, his blade catching the sunlight in a sharp glint as he feinted toward her left, only to swing viciously for her right. Aaliyah wasn't fooled. She read his shift in weight like an open book, jerking her wheelchair back just enough for the blade to slice through empty air, missing her by a hair's breadth. His arm hung extended, exposed, and Aaliyah pounced. Her hand shot out, seizing his wrist with a grip like iron before he could pull back. With a brutal twist, she forced his hand open and the knife clattered to the pavement. He yelped, his body lurching forward from the force, and Aaliyah used his momentum against him, slamming him face first into the gritty concrete. His cheek scraped across the rough surface, leaving a smear of blood in its wake. The others stood frozen, their cocky smirks replaced by creeping uncertainty. The leader groaned, dazed, sprawled on the ground. The broad-shouldered one, undeterred, came at her next. His fist swung wildly, but Aaliyah ducked low, her reflexes razor-sharp. She countered with a precise elbow to his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping, and she didn't hesitate. Grabbing his arm, she yanked him down hard, targeting his already injured leg. His scream of agony echoed through the alley, sharp and satisfying. The remaining attackers faltered, their bravado crumbling. The youngest stared at her, eyes wide with shock, clearly rethinking every choice that had led him to this moment. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the tense air. One of the group muttered a curse under his breath, cops. The leader, face bloodied and bruised, pushed himself up on trembling hands. Fury burned in his eyes, but even he knew the fight was over. This isn't finished. He spat, his voice dripping with venom, before stumbling to his feet and staggering off. The others scrambled after him, dragging their wounded comrades as they vanished into the shadows of the alley. Aaliyah let out a slow, steady breath, her heart still racing. She let them go for now. Rolling her shoulders to ease the tension, she adjusted her sleeves as the sirens closed in. This wasn't the end. Far from it. This was just the opening chapter. Inside the sterile white walls of the police station, Aaliyah Carter sat calmly, her expression unreadable. The low hum of officers' conversations and the occasional shrill ring of a desk phone filled the air, punctuated by the distant wail of a patrol car speeding off to another call. Detective Lisa McGrath, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, sat across from her, flipping through a stack of paperwork with a weary sigh. McGrath had crossed paths with Aaliyah before not here, but in high-stakes government briefings where FBI intelligence overlapped with local law enforcement. She knew exactly who Aaliyah was. But right now, Aaliyah wasn't a lieutenant. She was just a civilian filing a report. 5 guys jump you in broad daylight, and you send 2 of them to the hospital, McGrath said, her lips twitching with a mix of skepticism and grudging respect. That's one hell of a story. Carter. Aaliyah's voice was steady, her posture relaxed. Not a story, a report. McGrath leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. The officers on scene got statements from witnesses. Security footage lines up with your account, and the paramedics confirm one of those guys has a shattered kneecap. She flipped a page in the file, almost absently. But something tells me you didn't come here expecting us to wrap this up with a bow. Aaliyah met her gaze, unflinching. This wasn't random. McGrath raised an eyebrow. They didn't take your wallet, didn't snatch your phone, didn't bolt until they realized they were outmatched. Yeah, that tracks. She paused, her tone shifting. So, what do you think this was? Aaliyah's finger tapped lightly on the table as she chose her words carefully. These weren't just street punks looking for a quick score. They were organized, deliberate. They didn't pick me by chance, they were hunting for someone like me. McGrath's frown deepened as she glanced back at the descriptions of the attackers. You recognize any of them? Aaliyah hesitated for a split second. Not their faces, but their mark. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. One of them had a black sun tattoo. McGrath's jaw tightened, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. That was all Aaliyah needed to know. She'd struck a nerve. The detective tapped her pen against the desk, her mind clearly racing. We've had reports of groups like that popping up around the city. Small time, nothing to make national news. But they're stirring up trouble in certain neighborhoods, harassment, intimidation. Sometimes worse. They're careful, though. No uniforms, no public marches. They blend in. She paused, studying Aaliyah. If you're right, and they targeted you specifically, they didn't know who you were, did they? No, Aaliyah said firmly. If they had, they wouldn't have walked away. McGrath nodded slowly. Processing. All right, I'll have my team dig into their known associates, see what we can turn up. But we both know this won't be a quick fix. Aaliyah understood exactly what she meant. These men weren't just thugs, they had resources, connections, someone pulling strings behind the scenes. A few arrests wouldn't dismantle their operation. I'll take it from here, Aaliyah said, already pushing away from the desk. McGrath rubbed her temples, exasperated. I figured you'd say that. Just don't make a mess I have to clean up. Aaliyah didn't make any promises. Back in her apartment, Aaliyah sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed a secure connection. Official police reports would take days, maybe weeks, to process. But she wasn't about to wait. She navigated through encrypted files, cross-referencing extremist activity with gang-related incidents in the city. The black sun tattoo wasn't just a hate symbol, it was a calling card, a marker of something far more organized. It wasn't just a gang, it was a recruitment tool. Her eyes narrowed as a pattern emerged. Multiple reports of harassment and violent attacks in predominantly black neighborhoods, all suspiciously underreported. The tactics matched what she'd faced: coordinated, deliberate, testing boundaries. Then there were the missing persons cases, names that never made the headlines, but whose disappearances lined up too closely with known gang activity. This wasn't just about intimidation. It was about power, control, a quiet takeover. Aaliyah reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she needed. Marcus Reynolds. She hit call. It rang twice before a deep, steady voice answered, calm but laced with the weight of years spent in combat zones. Didn't expect to hear from you so soon, Marcus said. Something tells me this isn't a friendly catch-up. Aaliyah's fingers drummed lightly on the desk. I got jumped today. 5 men. Coordinated. They didn't know who I was, but they knew who they were looking for. A long pause, then Marcus exhaled. You okay? Bruised, not broken, she replied. But that's not the issue. They weren't just a gang. They were probing, pushing limits, seeing how far they could go before someone pushes back. Marcus didn't respond immediately, but Aaliyah could practically hear him piecing it together. Black Sun, he asked finally. One of them had the tattoo, she confirmed. Marcus cursed softly. That's not small time. That's a movement. And if they're bold enough to pull this in broad daylight, they think they've got protection. Then we strip it away, Aaliyah said, her voice resolute. A low, knowing chuckle came through the line. That's why you called me. Aaliyah leaned back in her chair. I need you on this. Marcus, I don't trust anyone else to watch my back. Another pause, then a sigh. All right, I'm in. Where do we start? She glanced at her screen, the reports and patterns staring back at her. We find out who's shielding them. Nadia. The night air was heavy, thick with humidity that clung to the city streets like a second skin. Aaliyah sat in the passenger seat of an unremarkable black SUV, her eyes fixed on a dimly lit warehouse across the street. The building crouched in a forgotten corner of the city, where questions went unasked, deals were made in whispers, and bodies vanished without a trace. Beside her, Marcus Reynolds adjusted the lens of a high-powered camera, his face half lit by the glow of his laptop. His fingers moved with practiced precision, cycling through surveillance feeds he'd patched into. "They're moving product," Marcus murmured, zooming in on a group of men unloading crates from a blacked-out van. "Doesn't look like drugs. Too methodical. Too careful." Aaliyah adjusted her earpiece, shifting slightly. "Weapons? Maybe? Or something worse." Marcus tapped a few keys, sharpening the grainy image. "We won't know unless we get closer." Aaliyah's gaze didn't waver as a tall figure stepped out from the warehouse's shadows. Derek Drock Mason. She recognized him instantly, his squared shoulders, his unreadable expression, the casual authority in his movements. Mason wasn't just muscle. He had connections, influence, and his presence here, personally overseeing this operation, meant this was bigger than a street-level deal. This was a step towards something far more dangerous. The dim glow of the warehouse district flickered in the distance as Aaliyah Carter crouched in the passenger seat of an unmarked van. Her eyes locked on the scene unfolding across the street. The usual hum of illicit business gruff voices, the clatter of crates, the low rumble of engines filled the air, but her focus sharpened when a new figure emerged from the shadows. Her stomach twisted. This man wasn't like the others. He didn't carry the swagger of a gang enforcer or the bulk of a hired thug. Older, with neatly combed salt and pepper hair and a rigid posture, he radiated a quiet authority that seemed out of place in this gritty corner of the city. His presence screamed power, the kind that didn't need to shout. Marcus, her tech-savvy partner, let out a hushed curse from behind his laptop in the driver's spot, his fingers hovering over the keys. "That's no low-life buyer," he muttered, his voice tight. Aaliyah's gaze stayed glued to the stranger. He wore a tailored gray suit, the kind that cost more than most people's rent, and moved with the confidence of someone who knew he was untouchable. His face tugged at a faint memory, but it wasn't until Marcus pulled up a facial recognition program on a second screen that the truth hit like a freight train. The software churned for a moment before spitting out a name: Nathaniel Briggs, Department of Homeland Security, third in command of counterterrorism operations. Marcus leaned back, hissing through his teeth. "Son of a, what's a guy like that doing in a dump like this?" Aaliyah's mind raced, stitching together the implications. Briggs wasn't just some bureaucrat. He had access to classified intelligence, the power to bury secrets or expose them. If he was here, shaking hands with Derek Mason, the city's most notorious gang leader, this wasn't just a street-level hustle. It was sanctioned, protected. "We need audio," Aaliyah said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. She reached into the back seat for the parabolic microphone while Marcus tweaked the device's settings. A soft click signaled it was live, and their earpieces crackled with the low hum of voices. Briggs' tone was sharp, controlled. "You're making too much noise. Derek, we agreed your crew keeps this quiet. No stunts in broad daylight, no news reports, and definitely no bodies piling up in hospitals." Aaliyah and Marcus exchanged a glance. This was it, confirmation. Briggs wasn't just aware of Mason's violent operations. He was in on them. Mason's voice came through next, smoother, almost amused. "I don't babysit every idiot on the street, Briggs, but I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. You're still getting your cut, aren't you?" Briggs' irritation was palpable. "That's not the issue. You're drawing eyes. If the wrong people start sniffing around, I can't shield you. Do you have any idea how far this goes? This isn't just about roughing up a few nobodies. We've got bigger plans. And if you mess this up, we're both finished." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. Bigger plans. Marcus tapped nervously at his laptop, monitoring the audio levels. "They're not just shaking down the streets," he whispered. "This is something massive." Mason's voice cut through again, laced with dark humor. "Calm down, shipments are already moving, and no one's caught on. You'll get your share, and the rest will go where it's supposed to. By the time anyone figures it out, it'll be way too late." Briggs didn't sound convinced. "Keep it clean. No more headlines, no more mistakes. I don't need this blowing back on my office." Aaliyah's jaw tightened. There it was proof a high-ranking federal official was shielding Mason's operation. But why? What were they moving? Where was it headed? The conversation wrapped up quickly. Briggs glanced at his watch, clearly eager to leave. We'll talk again in a week. Keep things quiet until then. Mason gave a curt nod, and the two men shook hands before Briggs strode toward a sleek black sedan parked just outside the warehouse. As soon as he drove off, Mason pulled out a burner phone, barking orders to his crew. Aaliyah and Marcus sat in heavy silence, the weight of what they'd overheard settling over them. Finally, Marcus exhaled slowly. Oh, this is huge. Aaliyah's mind was already 3 steps ahead. It's not just a gang problem anymore. We're looking at federal corruption. Marcus rubbed his hands over his face, his voice low. If Briggs is involved, we're talking top-level clearance, government resources, maybe even funding. Whatever this is, it's massive. Aaliyah's hands curled into fists. Then we take it down, piece by piece. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. Agreed, but we need more than footage. We need something that'll bury them. Aaliyah glanced back at the warehouse, her pulse steady despite the stakes. We start with their supply chain. Follow the money, track the shipments, find out what they're moving. Marcus cracked his knuckles. And when we've got it, Aaliyah's lips curved into a cold smile. We burn them to the ground. The early morning sun streamed through the towering windows of the FBI headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished floors of Director Jonathan Keene's office. Aaliyah sat across from him, her posture rigid, her face unreadable as she handed over a folder filled with surveillance photos. Keene, a seasoned man in his mid-50s with graying hair and a face etched with the stress of years in the bureau, studied the images carefully. After a moment, he leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes meeting hers. You know what you're showing me, Carter, he said, his voice measured but heavy with implication. I do, Aaliyah replied, unflinching. Keene tossed the folder onto his desk and steepled his fingers. A senior Homeland Security official caught meeting a known gang leader at a warehouse, possibly moving illegal shipments. If this is real, it's bigger than you or me. Aaliyah nodded, which is why I need Bureau resources. Briggs isn't just covering for them, he's protecting something massive. Marcus and I need to track the shipments, follow the money, and figure out who else is involved before they bury it. Keene exhaled sharply. This isn't as simple as raiding a hideout. If you go after someone like Briggs, you need airtight evidence. Anything less, and this blows up in our faces. Aaliyah leaned forward, her voice firm. That's why we don't touch Briggs yet. We dismantle the gang's operation piece by piece, force him into the open. But I need access to financial records, shell companies, anything tied to their supply chain. Keene rubbed his jaw, his expression grim. This stays in this room. Carter, if word gets out that the FBI is investigating one of its own, you know what happens. She met his gaze head on. That's why I came to you first. After a long pause, Keene gave a slow nod and reached for his secure phone. I'll authorize limited resources quietly. But anything off the books, you're on your own. Aaliyah took it as a victory. That afternoon, she met Detective Lisa McGraw at a quiet cafe a few blocks from the precinct. Far from prying ears, McGraw, practical and no-nonsense, arrived in jeans and a leather jacket, her service weapon tucked discreetly at her hip. She slid into the booth across from Aaliyah, ordered a black coffee, and flipped through the case files on the table. You weren't messing around, she muttered, eyeing photos of Mason's operation guns, cash, and now a federal connection. This is a recipe for chaos. Aaliyah tapped the folder. I need eyes on Mason's key players. I've got FBI support, but not enough for a direct move. We need hard evidence linking the gang to Briggs before we pull him in. McGraw let out a dry laugh. You're asking for backup when half my department's probably on their payroll. That's a gamble, Carter. Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. Are you on their payroll? McGraw snorted. If I was, I wouldn't be sitting here. She closed the folder, exhaling. I can give you a few guys people I trust. But the second this gets hot, Mason's gonna know. And when he does, he won't run. He'll hit back. Aaliyah wasn't surprised. Then we hit harder. McGraw studied her for a moment, then smirked. You don't quit, do you? Aaliyah's lips barely curved. Not when I'm right. Across town, in a dimly lit warehouse buzzing with activity, Derek Mason paced the concrete floor, his face taut with anger. He'd gotten word an hour ago someone had been watching his deal the previous night. Not just anyone, Aaliyah Carter. His second in command, Leon Rourke, leaned against a crate of unmarked weapons, his voice low. She's not just a nuisance. Derek, she's a threat. If we don't stop her, this whole operation's exposed. Mason's eyes flashed. You think I don't know that? He grabbed a crowbar and slammed it against a crate, the impact echoing through the room. That's why we're not waiting for her to come to us. We set the stage. Rourke's eyes narrowed. You sure we don't even know how much she's got? Mason's grip tightened on the crowbar. She doesn't know how deep this goes. She thinks she's the hero, but she's already lost. He turned to his crew, his voice cold and commanding. We don't run, we dictate. We set a trap, let her think she's winning. Then we end her for good. Rourke hesitated. Briggs won't like the noise. Mason's smirk was chilling. Briggs doesn't need to know. A moment passed before Rourke nodded. What's the plan? Mason's smile widened. She wants to chase the money. Let's give her something to chase. In the dim glow of her apartment, Aaliyah hunched over a cluttered desk, her eyes darting across a maze of financial records. The soft hum of her laptop was the only sound in the room until a sharp ping broke her focus. An alert flashed on her screen, a flagged transaction, a new shipment on the move. Her pulse quickened. This was the lead she'd been chasing, though she didn't yet realize it was exactly what Mason wanted her to find. She'd taken her first step into his carefully laid trap. The coordinates pointed to an abandoned industrial lot on the city's edge, where dilapidated warehouses stood like forgotten sentinels along cracked asphalt roads. Their rusted metal walls, scarred by time and neglect, loomed under a moonless sky. The night was heavy, broken only by the faint drone of a distant highway and the sporadic drip of water from leaking pipes echoing in the darkness. Aaliyah sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's weathered SUV, her laptop balanced on her knees as she cross-checked the transaction. The data told a chilling story. A hefty sum had flowed from an anonymous offshore account to a logistics firm tied to one of Mason's aliases. That firm had paid for a delivery of agricultural equipment to this desolate place. But there were no tractors here. No farming tools, just empty buildings, graffiti-streaked walls, and countless shadows where danger could lurk. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his sharp eyes scanning the lot. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. You see anything? Aaliyah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus lifted his night vision binoculars, sweeping the area. Nothing clear, no guards, no lookouts. Either they think no one's watching, or they're begging us to stroll right in. Aaliyah nodded, snapping her laptop shut. We play this careful. Scout first, then decide how far we push. Marcus cracked a grin. Scouting's your game, Carter. Me, I'm more the kick the door down and wing it type. She shot him a look. And that's why you've got a rap sheet of concussions longer than my arm. He chuckled softly. Touché. They moved like ghosts, slipping from the SUV into the cover of darkness. Marcus took the lead, his pistol drawn, while Aaliyah glided silently behind. Her movements precise and controlled. Years of training made their approach flawless, quiet, calculated, a dance honed by instinct. At the warehouse's side entrance, Marcus tested the handle. It turned easily. Aaliyah's stomach twisted. Unlocked doors are never good news, she muttered. Marcus eased the door open, peering inside. The cavernous space was barren, no crates, no equipment, just a lone work light swaying from the ceiling, casting ghostly shadows across the concrete floor. Aaliyah's skin prickled. We need to pull back, she said. But before Marcus could answer, a gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet grazed the metal siding inches from his shoulder, spitting sparks into the night. Instinct kicked in. Aaliyah spun back, her wheelchair pivoting with practiced speed as Marcus dove for cover behind the cluster of rusted barrels. Ambush, he hissed, drawing his weapon. Aaliyah's eyes flicked it upward, catching shadows shifting along the rafters, 2 snipers. Maybe more. The shots weren't meant to kill. Not yet. They were pinning them down. A voice cut through the warehouse, slow and taunting. You should have stayed out of this. Aaliyah, Mason. Her grip tightened on her armrests. You're slipping, Mason, she called back, her voice steady. If this is your trap, you're taking too long to spring it. His laugh echoed, cold and deliberate. Oh, don't worry. We're just warming up. Movement flashed to her right, 3 figures emerging from the shadows. Weapons raised. Mason's crew. Marcus fired first, his bullet catching the nearest man in the shoulder. The thug crumpled with a choked scream, his gun clattering to the floor. The second returned fire, but Aaliyah was already moving, staying low as the shot sparked against the concrete behind her. Her modified wheelchair gave her an edge most never anticipated, letting her pivot and weave at angles that threw off their aim. She reached into her vest, pulling a compact taser. The second gunman didn't see her coming. As he closed in, she spun sharply, jamming the electrodes into his side. Electricity crackled, and he collapsed, convulsing. The third man froze for a split second, long enough for Aaliyah to knock his weapon aside with a quick jerk and drive an elbow into his throat. He staggered back, gasping. Marcus fired again, dropping the last attacker with a clean shot to the leg. Mason was already slipping away, his silhouette vanishing through a side exit as he barked orders into a phone. He's running. Marcus growled. Let him, Aaliyah said, her chest heaving with controlled breaths. He just gave us everything we needed. Marcus's eyes narrowed. That wasn't just a hit squad. He knew we were coming. Aaliyah nodded, which means we've got a leak. Back at the safe house, a cramped rental property tucked away on the city's outskirts, the air was thick with tension. The old floorboards creaked under Marcus's boots as he paced near the door. His arms crossed. Aaliyah sat at a scarred wooden table, surrounded by scattered papers, photos, and her glowing laptop. The screen's blue light carved sharp lines across her face, highlighting the strain in her jaw. Marcus knew that look. Her mind was a storm, sifting through chaos for the thread that would tie it all together. He sighed, stepping closer. You gonna stare at those files all night, or you got something to say? Aaliyah didn't look up. You know what this means, right? Her voice was calm, but there was a razor's edge to it. Marcus leaned against the wall. Yeah, we walked into a trap bet by one of the city's nastiest gangs, who knew we were coming because someone probably in law enforcement tipped them off. And now we've got proof this whole operation's bankrolled by a sitting U.S. Senator. He let out a dry laugh. Did I miss anything? She finally met his gaze, her dark eyes burning with something heavier than frustration. No, Marcus. It means we're fighting a war we can't win. The words hung between them, raw and heavy. Aaliyah rubbed her temples, exhaling. This isn't just Mason's crew anymore. He's a pawn. We go after him. We're not just dodging his thugs, we're up against the people shielding him. Senator Hargrove, Briggs, and who knows how many others. They've got money, power, connections. If we push too hard, they'll bury this. They'll bury us. And nothing changes. Marcus studied her for a long moment before pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. You're right, he said, his voice steady. We can't beat them their way. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. He leaned forward, tapping a photo of Mason shaking hands with Briggs. But that's the thing. Carter, we don't play by their rules. This is leverage. They think they can squash this before it sees daylight, but they don't get it. People like us, we don't back down. Aaliyah's lips twitched, almost a smile. You sound awfully hopeful for a guy who just dodged a sniper's bullet. Marcus grinned, but it was sharp, determined. Not hope. I just know who we are. He leaned back, folding his arms. They want us scared, They want us to run. But look at what we've got. That offshore account didn't just lead us to Mason, it tied him to Hargrove. This isn't just a gang anymore. It's a machine, and we just found the first crack. Aaliyah glanced at her laptop, pulling up the financial data again. The offshore account wasn't just a loose thread. It was a neon sign pointing to Senator William Hargrove. Her eyes hardened. This explains everything. The cover-ups, how Mason's crew operates without a hitch, why Briggs is untouchable. It's not just a gang terrorizing neighborhoods, it's a system built to protect them while their victims get nothing. She looked up, her voice like steel. We tear it down, Marcus. Piece by piece, from the street to the top. Marcus's grin widened. Now that's the Carter I know. Aaliyah Carter leaned back in her chair, her sharp gaze cutting through the dim light of the safe house. Marcus sat across from her, his smirk carrying the weight of their latest discovery. Mason went all out to set that trap for you, he said, his voice low but deliberate. And you know what that tells me? He leaned forward, eyes glinting with conviction. You've got them scared out of their minds. Aaliyah exhaled, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. She wanted to brush it off, to insist that fear alone wouldn't win this war. But Marcus wasn't wrong. Mason's desperate move had been a misstep, a crack in the armor of an operation that thrived in the shadows. His panic had forced Briggs, his shadowy right-hand man, to step into the open. And now, with Hargrove's name tied to the conspiracy, they had to lead a thread that could unravel the entire corrupt network. This wasn't about brute strength. It was about shining a light on their secrets. Marcus softened his tone, sensing her hesitation. Look, Aaliyah, I know we're up against people who play dirty, people with connections we can't even map out yet. But we've already done the impossible. He gestured to the table between them, cluttered with photos, documents, and encrypted drives. We dragged them out of hiding. They're scrambling, making mistakes. His words settled over her, heavy with truth, for the first time since the ambush that had nearly cost her everything. Aaliyah let herself feel the magnitude of what they had uncovered. This wasn't just about Mason's gang anymore. They'd traced the money millions funneled through shell companies straight to a U.S. senator. They'd confirmed a DHS official was shielding the operation, burying evidence and silencing witnesses. This wasn't a local crime ring, it was a national scandal, a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of power. If they played their cards right, if they gathered enough ironclad evidence, this wouldn't just be a fight in the dark. It would be a public reckoning, a blaze that would burn the guilty to ash. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. All right, she said, her voice steady. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a spark of curiosity in his expression. All right, what? Aaliyah met his gaze, a fierce determination flickering in her eyes. All right, let's tear their whole damn system apart. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Marcus's face. Now that's the Carter I know. She pushed back from the table, her mind already racing. First, we need a new way in. Official channels are compromised. There could be a leak anywhere. We go independent, dig into Hargrove's finances, his connections, his donors. We find out how far this reaches before we strike. Marcus nodded, flipping open his laptop. And Mason. Aaliyah's expression turned cold as steel. We hit his operation hard, force him to slip up. And when he does, we'll be waiting. Marcus cracked his knuckles, his grin widening. Now that's a plan I can get behind. The weight that had pressed on Aaliyah's chest began to lift, replaced by a fire she hadn't felt in weeks. The war was just beginning, but for the first time, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting to win. Yeah. The Belmont port stretched out before them, a sprawling maze of industrial docks where the salty tang of the ocean mixed with the sharp bite of oil. Towering stacks of shipping containers loomed under the harsh glare of floodlights, casting jagged shadows across the pavement. This was the city's busiest cargo hub, a place where legitimate trade blurred into the underworld's dealings. Tonight, it would be Mason's downfall. Aaliyah adjusted her earpiece, her breath steady as she crouched on a rooftop overlooking the docks. Marcus's voice crackled through, calm and focused from the blacked-out van parked 2 blocks away, eyes on the target. 2 black SUVs just rolled up near Warehouse 17. 5 guys, no Mason yet. She peered through her binoculars, watching the men below move with practiced efficiency. They unlocked the warehouse's massive steel doors, unaware of the trap waiting inside. For the past 72 hours, Aaliyah and Marcus had worked tirelessly, mapping Mason's supply lines, pinpointing his distribution points, and feeding his crew carefully crafted misinformation. The bait was set a shipment that didn't exist. The crates inside were filled with nothing but scrap metal and junk, designed to look like a botched delivery, enough to make Mason's crew panic, enough to make them act recklessly. "They're moving inside," Aaliyah whispered. "Any sign of law enforcement?" "McGraw's team is staged 2 blocks out, waiting for your signal," Marcus replied. "If this goes right, we don't just disrupt Mason's operation, we cripple it." Aaliyah's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Then let's make some noise." She pulled out a small remote detonator and pressed the button. A deafening bang erupted from the far side of the docks as an abandoned fuel drum exploded into a fireball. The blast was harmless but loud, designed to send Mason's crew into chaos. Shouts rang out below as the men scattered, weapons drawn, searching for an enemy that wasn't there. Marcus's voice cut through the earpiece, and just like that, they're running scared. Aaliyah was already in motion. She descended the fire escape with cat-like precision, rolling onto the pavement and slipping into the shadows. She crept toward the warehouse's open doors, where 2 of Mason's men were frantically ripping the tarp off the crates, their faces twisted in confusion as they uncovered nothing but worthless metal. "What the hell is this?" one growled, kicking a crate. The other yanked out his phone, fumbling to call Mason. Aaliyah struck before he could dial, surging forward and slamming her elbow into his wrist. The phone clattered to the ground. Before he could recover, she twisted his arm into a brutal joint lock, forcing him to his knees with a pained yelp. The second thug spun toward her, gun raised, but a single shot rang out. Marcus's bullet grazed the man's hand, making him drop the weapon in shock. Marcus emerged from the shadows, his own gun steady. "Don't even think about it," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace, "unless you want the next one to hit somewhere that hurts." The 2 men froze, one groaning on the ground, the other raising his hands in surrender. The trap had worked perfectly. Outside, sirens wailed as McGraw's team stormed the docks. Squad cars screeched to a halt, officers flooding the area. Mason's remaining crew was caught off guard, surrounded within seconds. Weapons were confiscated, and the men were forced to their knees, cuffed and read their rights. Aaliyah watched the takedown unfold, her pulse steady. Mason's operation had just lost a critical shipment. His men were in custody, and best of all, they'd walked right into the trap she'd set. Marcus stepped beside her, a satisfied grin on his face. You gotta love it when a plan comes together. Aaliyah's expression remained guarded, but her eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. This is just the beginning. Marcus glanced at the men being loaded into patrol cars. Think they'll talk? They will, Aaliyah said, her voice low. One way or another. She turned to him, her tone sharpening. But these guys aren't the real prize. They're just foot soldiers. The question is, who was Mason expecting to meet here, because this wasn't just his usual crew? Marcus's smirk faded. Another buyer. Aaliyah shook her head. Mason's diversifying. Whatever he's moving, it's not just guns anymore. There's something bigger at play, and I want to know who was supposed to pick up the shipment. She checked her watch. We'll know soon enough. The second they're in holding, we start breaking them down. Marcus crossed his arms, his expression grim. And if they don't talk, Aaliyah's gaze turned icy. They will. I'll make sure of it. The FBI interrogation room was stark, its cold white light casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. Aaliyah stood with her arms crossed, her piercing eyes locked on the two men seated across from her. Both wore orange jumpsuits, their wrists shackled to the steel table. The air was thick with the stale scent of coffee and nervous sweat. One, a wiry man with a jagged scar across his jaw, leaned back with a forced smirk, his fingers twitching, betraying his bravado. The other, broader, with tattoos snaking up his neck, glared at her. His jaw clenched so tightly it seemed he might shatter his own teeth. They hadn't spoken yet, but Aaliyah was patient. She let the silence stretch, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like a physical force. Psychological pressure was her weapon of choice, more effective than brute force when wielded with precision. Finally, Fern, she spoke, her voice smooth and deliberate. You know, I respect loyalty. It's rare in your line of work. But here's the thing. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her gaze unyielding. How much do you think Mason values your loyalty? The tattooed man scoffed, his voice rough. You think you're gonna rattle us? Lady, I've been in and out of lockup since I was a kid. You're not the first cop to try this, and you won't be the last. Aaliyah studied him, her expression unreadable. Since you were a kid? Huh. She nodded slightly, as if considering his words. That's a long time to be someone else's pawn. Scarjaw's smirk faltered, but he covered it with a laugh. We ain't pawns. Aaliyah tilted her head, her eyes flicking between them. Then tell me this. If Mason's such a big shot, why are you the one sitting here in chains? Aaliyah Carter leaned back in her chair, her sharp gaze cutting through the dim light of the safe house. Marcus sat across from her, his smirk carrying the weight of their latest discovery. Mason went all out to set that trap for you, he said, his voice low but deliberate. And you know what that tells me? He leaned forward, eyes glinting with conviction. You've got them scared out of their minds. Aaliyah exhaled, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. She wanted to brush it off, to insist that fear alone wouldn't win this war. But Marcus wasn't wrong. Mason's desperate move had been a misstep, a crack in the armor of an operation that thrived in the shadows. His panic had forced Briggs, his shadowy right-hand man, to step into the open. And now, with Hargrove's name tied to the conspiracy, they had to lead a thread that could unravel the entire corrupt network. This wasn't about brute strength, it was about shining a light on their secrets. Marcus softened his tone, sensing her hesitation. Look, Aaliyah, I know we're up against people who play dirty, people with connections we can't even map out yet. But we've already done the impossible. He gestured to the table between them, cluttered with photos, documents, and encrypted drives. We dragged them out of hiding. They're scrambling, making mistakes. His words settled over her, heavy with truth, for the first time since the ambush that had nearly cost her everything. Aaliyah let herself feel the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just about Mason's gang anymore. They'd traced the money millions funneled through shell companies straight to a U.S. senator. They'd confirmed a DHS official was shielding the operation, burying evidence and silencing witnesses. This wasn't a local crime ring, it was a national scandal. A web of corruption that reached the highest levels of power. If they played their cards right, if they gathered enough ironclad evidence, this wouldn't just be a fight in the dark. It would be a public reckoning, a blaze that would burn the guilty to ash. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. All right, she said, her voice steady. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a spark of curiosity in his expression. All right, what? Aaliyah met his gaze, a fierce determination flickering in her eyes. All right, let's tear their whole damn system apart. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Marcus's face. Now that's the Carter I know. She pushed back from the table, her mind already racing. First, we need a new way in. Official channels are compromised. There could be a leak anywhere. We go independent. Dig into Hargrove's finances, his connections, his donors. We find out how far this reaches before we strike. Marcus nodded, flipping open his laptop. And Mason. Aaliyah's expression turned cold as steel. We hit his operation hard, force him to slip up, and when he does, we'll be waiting. Marcus cracked his knuckles, his grin widening. Now that's a plan I can get behind. The weight that had pressed on Aaliyah's chest began to lift, replaced by a fire she hadn't felt in weeks. The war was just beginning, but for the first time she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting to win. The Belmont port stretched out before them, a sprawling maze of industrial docks where the salty tang of the ocean mixed with the sharp bite of oil. Towering stacks of shipping containers loomed under the harsh glare of floodlights, casting jagged shadows across the pavement. This was the city's busiest cargo hub, a place where legitimate trade blurred into the underworld's dealings. Tonight, it would be Mason's downfall. Aaliyah adjusted her earpiece, her breath steady as she crouched on a rooftop overlooking the docks. Marcus's voice crackled through, calm and focused from the blacked-out van parked 2 blocks away. Eyes on the target, 2 black SUVs just rolled up near Warehouse 17. 5 guys, no Mason yet. She peered through her binoculars, watching the men below move with practiced efficiency. They unlocked the warehouse's massive steel doors, unaware of the trap waiting inside. For the past 72 hours, Aaliyah and Marcus had worked tirelessly, mapping Mason's supply lines, pinpointing his distribution points, and feeding his crew carefully crafted misinformation. The bait was set a shipment that didn't exist. The crates inside were filled with nothing but scrap metal and junk, designed to look like a botched delivery. Enough to make Mason's crew panic, enough to make them act recklessly. "They're moving inside," Aaliyah whispered. "Any sign of law enforcement?" "McGraw's team is staged 2 blocks out, waiting for your signal," Marcus replied. "If this goes right, we don't just disrupt Mason's operation, we cripple it." Aaliyah's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Then let's make some noise." She pulled out a small remote detonator and pressed the button. A deafening bang erupted from the far side of the docks as an abandoned fuel drum exploded into a fireball. The blast was harmless, but loud, designed to send Mason's crew into chaos. Shouts rang out below as the men scattered, weapons drawn, searching for an enemy that wasn't there. Marcus's voice cut through the earpiece. And just like that, they're running scared. Aaliyah was already in motion. She descended the fire escape with cat-like precision, rolling onto the pavement and slipping into the shadows. She crept toward the warehouse's open doors, where 2 of Mason's men were frantically ripping the tarp off the crates, their faces twisted in confusion as they uncovered nothing but worthless metal. "What the hell is this?" one growled, kicking a crate. The other yanked out his phone, fumbling to call Mason. Aaliyah struck before he could dial, surging forward and slamming her elbow into his wrist. The phone clattered to the ground. Before he could recover, she twisted his arm into a brutal joint lock, forcing him to his knees with a pained yelp. The second thug spun toward her, gun raised, but a single shot rang out. Marcus's bullet grazed the man's hand, making him drop the weapon in shock. Marcus emerged from the shadows, his own gun steady. "Don't even think about it," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace, "unless you want the next one to hit somewhere that hurts." The 2 men froze, one groaning on the ground, the other raising his hands in surrender. The trap had worked perfectly. Outside, sirens wailed as McGraw's team stormed the docks. Squad cars screeched to a halt, officers flooding the area. Mason's remaining crew was caught off guard, surrounded within seconds. Weapons were confiscated, and the men were forced to their knees, cuffed and read their rights. Aaliyah watched the takedown unfold, her pulse steady. Mason's operation had just lost a critical shipment. His men were in custody, and best of all, they'd walked right into the trap she'd set. Marcus stepped beside her, a satisfied grin on his face. You gotta love it when a plan comes together. Aaliyah's expression remained guarded, but her eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. This is just the beginning. Marcus glanced at the men being loaded into patrol cars. Think they'll talk? They will, Aaliyah said, her voice low. One way or another. She turned to him, her tone sharpening. But these guys aren't the real prize. They're just foot soldiers. The question is, who was Mason expecting to meet here, because this wasn't just his usual crew? Marcus's smirk faded. Another buyer. Aaliyah shook her head. Mason's diversifying. Whatever he's moving, it's not just guns anymore. There's something bigger at play. And I want to know who was supposed to pick up this shipment. She checked her watch. We'll know soon enough. The second they're in holding, we start breaking them down. Marcus crossed his arms, his expression grim. And if they don't talk, Aaliyah's gaze turned icy. They will. I'll make sure of it. Why? The FBI interrogation room was stark, its cold white light casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. Aaliyah stood with her arms crossed, her piercing eyes locked on the two men seated across from her. Both wore orange jumpsuits, their wrists shackled to the steel table. The air was thick with the stale scent of coffee and nervous sweat. One, a wiry man with a jagged scar across his jaw, leaned back with a forced smirk, his fingers twitching, betraying his bravado. The other, broader, with tattoos snaking up his neck, glared at her, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed he might shatter his own teeth. They hadn't spoken yet, but Aaliyah was patient. She let the silence stretch, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like a physical force. Psychological pressure was her weapon of choice, more effective than brute force when wielded with precision. Finally, she spoke, her voice smooth and deliberate. You know, I respect loyalty. It's rare in your line of work. But here's the thing. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her gaze unyielding. How much do you think Mason values your loyalty? The tattooed man scoffed, his voice rough. You think you're gonna rattle us, lady. I've been in and out of lockup since I was a kid. You're not the first cop to try this, and you won't be the last. Aaliyah studied him, her expression unreadable. Since you were a kid, huh? She nodded slightly, as if considering his words. That's a long time to be someone else's pawn. Scarjaw's smirk faltered, but he covered it with a laugh. We ain't pawns. Aaliyah tilted her head, her eyes flicking between them. Then tell me this. If Mason's such a big shot, why are you the one sitting here in chains? She sat across from them, letting the weight of her question linger in the air. Tattoo Neck's fingers tightened into fists, his knuckles whitening under the strain. He sent you into a trap, she said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension. Our trap. He had to know something was wrong. So why did he still send you? Tattoo Neck's glare sharpened, his eyes burning with defiance. But Scarjaw shifted in his seat, a flicker of doubt crossing his weathered face. She caught it instantly, like a predator sensing weakness. With a deliberate motion, she reached for a file from the stack on the table, flipped it open, and revealed a grainy surveillance photo. It showed Mason, their boss, standing beside a sharply dressed man outside a government building. She slid the image across the table, her fingernail tapping the photo with purpose. Recognize this guy. Neither man spoke. Tattoo Neck's jaw clenched, but Scarjaw's eyes lingered on the photo a moment too long. She exhaled, leaning forward. That's Senator William Hargrove, she said, her tone calm but piercing. A man with deep pockets, deeper influence, and plenty of reasons to keep someone like Mason out of a cell. Now, I'm guessing you two don't exactly sip champagne with senators. So, what does Mason have that Hargrove wants? Tattoo Neck's shoulders stiffened, his silence loud with anger. Scarjaw. Though betrayed himself, again his smirk faded, replaced by a dawning realization. She seized the moment, her voice dropping low, almost intimate. You think Mason's got your back? That he's out there, plotting to spring you from this mess? She shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He's not. You were never part of his real plan. Shut up, Tattoo Neck snarled, his voice rough, but she ignored him, her focus locked on Scarjaw. Am I wrong, she pressed, her words like a blade. He sent you on a job you weren't ready for, and now you're here, taking the fall. Meanwhile, Mason's out there, making moves, big ones. You're just a distraction. Scarjaw swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he shifted again. She didn't let up. Ever wonder why Mason's empire is growing so fast? Why he suddenly got cash to throw around? He's not just moving guns anymore. He's tied to something much bigger. And you? She paused, letting the silence sting. You're not trusted enough to know what it is. You're just pawns. Tattoo Neck slammed his fist on the table, the metal rattling under the force. You don't know anything, he roared. She didn't flinch. Her smile only widened. cool and unshaken. Scarjaw, though, was unraveling. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw tight, his mind clearly racing. She saw the cracks forming and pushed harder. "What happens to you now?" she asked, her voice softening, almost sympathetic. "Hargrove's got lawyers who can make a murder charge vanish. Mason's got powerful friends who will keep him untouchable. But you'll rot in the cell while the people who set you up get richer off the chaos they've sown." Scarjaw's breathing grew uneven, his eyes flicking between her and the photo. Tattoo Neck was still fuming, but she wasn't talking to him anymore. She leaned closer to Scarjaw, her voice a quiet, personal challenge. "You're nothing to them. They won't protect you. They'll erase you." Scarjaw's head shook slightly, his gaze dropping to his shackled hands. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, finally, bro, he exhaled, his voice barely a whisper. "She's right," he muttered, avoiding Tattoo Neck's furious stare. "This isn't just about the gang. It's bigger. I don't know everything, but Mason's been meeting with people, businessmen, politicians. He's planning something huge, and we were just supposed to keep the streets chaotic. Keep the heat on us while they work in the shadows." Tattoo Neck whipped his head toward his partner. "What the hell are you doing?" Scarjaw ignored him, his voice growing steadier. "I don't know the details, but Mason's got a meeting soon. Someone important. Whatever they're planning, it's going to change everything." She kept her expression neutral, nodding slowly as she exchanged a glance with Marcus, who had been silent in the corner. "We need to find that meeting," she said, her tone resolute. Marcus nodded. "And when we do, we bring them all down." Matabim. The luxury hotel was a world apart from the gritty streets they'd been working. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished marble floors, and the air carried the rich scent of cigars and aged whiskey. Wealthy guests mingled, their low conversations a hum of privilege, unaware of the corruption lurking among them. She and Marcus moved through the crowd like shadows, blending effortlessly. Marcus wore a tailored suit, every bit the high-rolling executive, while she glided in a sleek black dress. Her wheelchair, drawing no notice in a place used to political galas and power plays. Their target was a private meeting room on the 26th floor, where Senator William Hargrove and Derek Mason were set to discuss what Scarjaw had called the bigger plan. They'd hacked the hotel's security feeds, giving Marcus 4 minutes to disable the hallway cameras. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As they approached the restricted area, she tapped her earpiece. "We go in, record everything, and get out before they know we were here." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. Let's hope Mason's cocky enough to spill it all. They slipped past the final security checkpoint, the guards distracted by a flood of VIP arrivals. She led the way, rolling silently to the heavy mahogany doors of the meeting room. Placing a small wireless recorder against the wood, she heard a faint crackle in her earpiece, confirming it was working. Inside, voices carried. "You're telling me this investigation is handled?" Hargrove's tone was sharp, laced with impatience. "Because it doesn't look that way. The last thing I need is some federal agent dragging my name through the mud." Mason's voice was smoother, almost amused. "Carter's a nuisance. I'll give you that. But my people are dealing with her. She won't be a problem much longer." Her hands tightened into fists, but she kept her breathing even. Mason wasn't just posturing, he was planning something serious. Hargrove sighed, the clink of ice in his glass punctuating his frustration. "You don't get it, Derek. This isn't some street hustle. We spent years building this network, laying the groundwork for something bigger than both of us. And you're letting some woman in a wheelchair unravel it because you can't control your crew." Her pulse quickened, but she stayed focused. Mason chuckled, the sound dark and confident. "You worry too much, Senator. Carter's sharp, but she's just one person. And we both know how easy it is to make one person vanish." The silence that followed was ice cold. Then Hargrove's voice dropped, deliberate and final. "I want it done. No more screw-ups." Marcus met her gaze, his expression grim. "We've got what we need," she whispered. He reached for the recorder, but the hallway lights flickered and died. plunging them into darkness. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the low hum of an emergency generator kicking in, bathing the corridor in dim red light. Her stomach twisted. They'd triggered something. She turned just as two armed men rounded the corner, their movements precise, weapons raised. Mason's men. "Move," Marcus shouted, shoving the recorder into his pocket and drawing his concealed pistol. He fired twice, hitting one guard in the shoulder, sending him staggering. The second ducked behind a pillar, returning fire. She pushed forward, weaving between the hallway's columns as bullets tore into the plaster. Marcus covered her, keeping the guards pinned as they raced for the service elevator. The doors slid open and they dove inside. She slammed the panel, hitting the button for the parking garage. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of Mason stepping into the hallway, his smirk chillingly calm. They'd escaped for now. Inside the SUV, Marcus floored it, weaving through the city's neon-lit streets, his grip on the wheel like iron. "They'll be hunting us now," he said, his voice tight. That meeting wasn't just about their plans. It was about erasing evidence, tying up loose ends. She replayed the recording in her earpiece, Hargrove's words echoing, "I want it done, no more mistakes." "We need to get this to Keene," Marcus said. "He can't ignore this. It's proof of government-backed terrorism. It's enough to dismantle their entire operation." She shook her head, her jaw clenched. "No." Marcus shot her a look. "No." She exhaled, her voice steady. "Keene's a good man, but if we hand this over now, we lose control. Mason and Hargrove have eyes everywhere. If they know we have this before we're ready, they'll bury it in us." Marcus cursed, his frustration palpable. "Then what's the plan?" Her eyes were cold, calculating. "We make them come to us." He frowned. "How?" She leaned forward, her voice low and resolute. "We leak just enough to make Mason panic. Let him know we have something, but not the whole picture. He'll do what every desperate man does. He'll come after us himself. And when he does, we'll be ready." The plan was airtight, a perfect snare, and Aaliyah knew it. Marcus's face clouded with doubt as he leaned against the wall, his arms crossed tightly. "You're setting a trap," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Aaliyah met his gaze, her eyes steady and unyielding. "It's the only way to win," she replied, her tone carrying the weight of conviction. A long, heavy silence hung between them, the kind that crackled with unspoken risks. Then, Marcus's lips curled into a reluctant smirk. "Fine," he said, exhaling sharply. "Let's dangle the bait." The warehouse loomed on the city's edge, a decaying relic of steel and concrete, abandoned by its former tenants and left to rot. Its cavernous interior swallowed light, the air thick with dust and the stale reek of oil ball and rust. For the past 12 hours, Aaliyah and Marcus had transformed this forgotten husk into a battlefield, a death trap designed to lure Mason and his crew into a fight they couldn't win. They'd rigged every corner, planned every move, ensuring that what Mason expected to be a quick execution would become his undoing. Aaliyah adjusted her earpiece, her voice a hushed whisper as she checked in. Cameras up from his perch on the second-floor catwalk. Marcus tapped his tablet, the surveillance feed flickering to life. "Got eyes," he confirmed. 6 incoming, 3 SUVs, loaded with firepower. Mason's brought his A-team. Aaliyah's lips twitched into a grim smile as she rolled her shoulders, shaking off the tension. "Good," she said. "Let's make sure they don't walk out." They'd been meticulous, leaving a trail of false leads, leaked footage. Whispered intel just enough to convince Mason that the warehouse held the evidence that could topple his empire. Enraged by the cracks forming in his criminal network, he'd taken the bait, rallying his men for what he thought would be a final, decisive strike. Instead, he was walking into a carefully orchestrated ambush. The SUVs roared to a stop outside, their headlights slicing through the darkness. Doors flew open, and Mason's men spilled out, moving with the precision of trained soldiers, weapons glinting in the dim light. Mason emerged last, his face twisted with fury. fists clenched as he scanned the building. "Move in," he barked, and his crew fanned out, sweeping the entrance with cautious efficiency. From the shadows, Aaliyah and Marcus watched, their pulses steady, waiting for the moment their prey crossed the threshold. The first trap sprang when one of Mason's men ventured too close to a stack of crates, his foot triggering a pressure-sensitive device. A piercing, high-frequency wail erupted, sending him staggering, hands clamped over his ears in agony. Before he could recover, a steel pipe, rigged to a pulley system, swung down with bone-crushing force, slamming into his ribs. He collapsed, gasping, growth of his weapons skittering across the floor. "One down," Marcus muttered, his eyes tracking the others as they hesitated, spooked but pressing deeper inside. Another thug kicked open a side door, only to trip a wire that unleashed a blinding flash of powder into his face. He stumbled back, cursing, his gun slipping from his grasp as he clawed at his eyes. Mason's voice cut through the chaos, thick with frustration. "Find them," he roared, his men scrambling to obey. Aaliyah glided through the maze of debris, her modified wheelchair navigating the obstacles with practiced ease. She'd memorized every inch of the setup, every trap, every choke point. Spotting a lone gunman breaking from the group, she seized the moment, gripping a length of metal piping stashed in her lap. She hurled it with deadly accuracy, striking his wrist. His gun clattered to the ground, and before he could react, Aaliyah surged forward, grabbing his arm and twisting it with a sickening crack. He screamed, collapsing in a heap. "Two down," she whispered, her breath steady. High above, Marcus moved like a specter along the catwalk, positioning himself above the remaining three. He waited until they were directly beneath him, then dropped a smoke canister. Thick, choking vapor engulfed them, their coughs echoing as they stumbled apart. Disoriented, Mason, realizing the trap, let out a feral snarl. "Cowards," he shouted. "You think you can pick us off like rats? Come out and fight." Marcus didn't hesitate. He dropped from the catwalk, landing in a roll and springing up fast, his fist crashing into the jaw of the nearest thug. The man staggered, but Marcus was relentless, driving a knee into his stomach and following with an elbow to the skull. The thug crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. Mason whirled, his eyes blazing with rage. "Been waiting for this," he growled, cracking his knuckles. The two men circled, tension crackling in the air. Mason swung first, his fist a blur of power, but Marcus dodged, countering with a vicious hook to the ribs. Mason grunted, stepping back, but he was quick, lunging forward to land a solid blow to Marcus's shoulder. Marcus barely flinched, twisting to grab Mason's arm and slamming him into a stack of crates. The metal groaned under the impact, but Mason shoved off, tackling Marcus to the ground. They grappled, fists flying in a brutal, primal brawl. Marcus blocked a punch, then delivered a crushing uppercut that snapped Mason's head back, blood dripping from his split lip. "You think taking me down ends this?" Mason spat, wiping the blood away, his grin defiant. "You don't know what you're up against." Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "Neither do you." With one final, devastating blow to the temple, he sent Mason's body slack, the gang leader collapsing in a heap. Aaliyah rolled forward, surveying the carnage, 3 men down, 2 unconscious, and Mason out cold. "Not bad," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, breathing hard. Now what? Aaliyah pulled out her phone, pressing a single button. "Now," she said as the faint wail of sirens grew louder. "We clean up." As dawn broke, the city skyline glowed under the early morning light. But for Senator William Hargrove, the beauty was lost. He sat rigid in the back of his town car, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest. His driver had strict orders: take the private route to the airfield, avoid main roads, and stop for nothing. Hargrove's phone buzzed with news alerts, reports of a massive gang takedown at the docks, arrests of high-profile criminals, and the unraveling of a domestic terror ring tied to law enforcement, government officials, and corporate elites. His empire, built on manipulation and fear, was collapsing. How much longer, he snapped, but the driver didn't respond, his posture stiffening as if sensing something amiss. Hargrove's instincts flared, but it was too late. A pair of black SUVs blocked the road ahead, their tinted windows hiding the faces within. Flashing lights flooded the car, sirens piercing the air. Hargrove cursed, reaching for the door, but the driver's window shattered, and a tactical team moved in, yanking the driver out and training their weapons on the senator. The back door swung open, and Aaliyah sat just outside, her arms crossed, watching as Hargrove was dragged from the car like a common thug, his face contorted with outrage. "This is madness," he shouted. "I'm a United States Senator. Do you know what you're doing?" Aaliyah's expression didn't waver. "Yeah," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm bringing you in." Hargrove turned to the lead FBI agent, desperation and arrogance warring in his eyes. "You know who I am," he growled. "You know who I work for. This is a mistake." The agent's face was stone. "William Hargrove, you're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." Hargrove's face reddened. "Don't recite my rights to me," he snapped. "I have lawyers. Power, you can't do this." Aaliyah's smirk was cold. "Looks like we just did." The agent shoved him into a waiting car, his threats echoing as he was driven away. Across the city, in a maximum security holding cell, Derek Mason sat shackled to a table in an interrogation room. His knuckles were bruised, his lips split from the warehouse fight, but his eyes burned with defiance. A guard stood by the door while Marcus leaned against the wall, arms folded. Aaliyah sat across from Mason, her gaze steady, untouched by the bravado he clung to. "You think this ends with me," Mason muttered, his voice thick with contempt. "You think you won." Aaliyah studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "No," she said, her tone even. "I don't think I won. I know I did." Mason's smirk faltered, a crack in his bravado. "You don't get it," he said. "You cut off a few heads, but the body's still alive. There'll be another crew, another Hargrove. You didn't stop anything." Aaliyah leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. "Maybe not," she said, but I stopped you." Mason's jaw tightened, his defiance wavering. "You know how many of your people flipped," she continued, her words sharp. "Your empire's crumbling, Mason, and we're just getting started. The moment they realized you were cornered, your so-called allies scattered like roaches in the light. We got everything we needed: names, bank accounts, wire transfers, the works. Enough to torch your entire operation and leave nothing but ash." Mason's smug grin faltered, just for a split second. As the weight of his crumbling empire sank in, Aaliyah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with a calm, piercing intensity. "Hargrove's finished," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Whatever shield you thought you had, it's gone. No one's riding to your rescue. Mason, you're on your own." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Mason's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as his hands balled into fists. He'd always banked on his connections, his untouchable status. Without them, he was just a man in chains, stripped of power. Suddenly, he moved faster than anyone expected for someone shackled. With a guttural snarl, he lunged at Aaliyah, his chair screeching against the concrete floor. But Marcus was quicker. In one fluid motion, he seized Mason by the collar, slamming him back into the seat with a force that echoed through the room. His hand clamped down on Mason's shoulder, pinning him in place. "Pathetic." Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Mason's ragged breaths filled the silence, his body trembling with impotent rage. Aaliyah stood, smoothing her jacket with deliberate calm. "Enjoy your time behind bars." "Mason," she said, her voice low but razor sharp. "You've earned every second of it." Without a backward glance, she strode out of the room, leaving him to stew in his defeat. Hours later, the city was buzzing with the fallout. The FBI had swept through the streets, rounding up Mason's network in a series of coordinated raids. Corrupt cops who'd pocketed his bribes, businessmen who'd funneled his dirty money, and politicians who'd turned a blind eye. They all fell like dominoes. A criminal web that had thrived in the shadows for years was finally dragged into the light. Outside the courthouse, Aaliyah sat on a bench, watching the frenzy unfold. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing as Hargrove's legal team tried to muscle through the crowd. News anchors spoke into microphones, their voices carrying over the chaos. One of the largest domestic terrorism cases in U.S. history. A senator indicted, an entire criminal network dismantled. Marcus approached, balancing two steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to Aaliyah before dropping onto the bench beside her. "You catch the news?" he asked, a grin tugging at his lips. Aaliyah took a sip, nodding. "Hard to miss," he chuckled, leaning back. "Gotta say, watching those snakes squirm, pretty damn satisfying." Aaliyah exhaled, a faint smile breaking through her stoic expression. "Yeah, it is." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their victory settling in as the world spun on round them. Then Marcus glanced at her, his tone lighter. "So, what's next? You gonna take a breather, or are we diving back in?" Aaliyah's smirk widened. "We make sure they don't get back up." Marcus laughed, raising his coffee in a mock toast. "Hell yeah." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters, government officials, and community leaders packed the rows, their eyes glued to the proceedings. Months of investigations, arrests, and legal battles had led to this moment. Aaliyah Carter sat at the prosecution's table, her hands clasped, her gaze unwavering as the judge entered and called for order. The cases against Derek Mason, Senator William Hargrove, and Homeland Security official Nathaniel Briggs had reached their climax. The prosecution had spent weeks building an airtight case, laying out financial records, wiretaps, and testimonies from turncoat associates. Every piece of evidence had chipped away at the fortress these men had hidden behind, exposing them as the architects of a sprawling network of corruption, organized crime, and domestic terrorism. Mason sat at the defense table, shackled, his once cocky demeanor replaced by a cold, simmering resentment. He'd watched his inner circle betray him, one by one, cutting deals to save their own skins. His empire had crumbled, leaving him a king without a crown. Beside him, Briggs looked like a ghost of his former self, a disgraced official clinging to the faint hope of a plea deal. His career, his influence, his carefully crafted reputation all gone. But the true spectacle was Hargrove, the senator. Once a towering figure of power and privilege, was now a pariah. His name splashed across headlines, his crimes dissected on every major network. He'd spent the trial scheming, trying to pull strings, to call in favors. But nothing had worked. For the first time, his wealth, his connections, his name, they meant nothing. The judge cleared his throat, lifting the sentencing documents. The court finds the defendants Derek Mason, Nathaniel Briggs, and William Hargrove guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism, racketeering, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Followed by the sharp, final strike of the gavel, Aaliyah let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. Mason leaned forward, his voice a low growl, his shackles clinking as he clenched his fists. "You think this changes anything? You think locking me up stops people like me?" Aaliyah met his gaze, unflinching. "You're right. People like you don't just vanish. That's why we break them." Mason's lip curled in a snarl, but before he could respond, guards stepped in, yanking him from his seat. He thrashed against their grip, but it was futile. Hargrove was next. As he stood, his face was a mask of composure, but his eyes betrayed him, burning with rage and disbelief. "You should have taken the money, Carter," he said, his voice thick with bitterness. "You could have had power. You could have had everything." Aaliyah's lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. I've got something better. It's called justice. Hargrove's expression twisted in disgust as the guards led him away, his legacy reduced to ashes. Briggs didn't even fight. When the sentence was read, he simply slumped in his chair, a broken man. As the courtroom doors swung open and the convicted men were escorted out, the weight of their downfall hung in the air. They were no longer untouchable, just names in a history book. Cautionary tales of greed and corruption brought to ruin. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the victory sink in. It wasn't just about this case, this trial. It was about proving that no one was above the law, no matter how powerful they seemed. Outside, the press descended like vultures, microphones thrust toward her as she stepped onto the courthouse steps. Lieutenant Carter, what do you say about today's verdict? Will this have a lasting impact? What's next for you? Aaliyah raised a hand, silencing the crowd. Her voice was clear, commanding. Today, justice was served. But this isn't just about one trial or one conviction. It's about sending a message: no one is untouchable. No matter how much power you have, how many people you control, the shadows can't hide you forever. She paused, letting her words linger, then turned to Marcus, who stood beside her, a satisfied grin on his face. Let's get out of here, she muttered. He chuckled. About time. Later that night, the city sprawled beneath them, a tapestry of flickering lights and distant sirens. From the rooftop of an old industrial building, Aaliyah and Marcus watched the world move on, unaware of the battles fought in its underbelly. Aaliyah leaned back in her wheelchair, the cool night air filling her lungs as she twisted the cap off a bottle of water Marcus had handed her. The past weeks had been a storm of arrests, trials, testimonies, and finally convictions. Mason was locked away in a maximum security prison, left to rot for the rest of his days. Briggs, stripped of his titles, would never set foot in a government office again. Hargrove, the once mighty senator, was now a synonym for betrayal, his name forever tarnished. Justice had prevailed. For once, but Aaliyah knew better than to think the fight was over. There would always be another Mason, another Hargrove, lurking in the shadows. Marcus leaned against the ledge, stretching his arms. So, he said, glancing at her with a teasing grin, you gonna take a vacation now, or are you just gonna keep driving me up the hall looking for the next bad guy? Aaliyah laughed softly, shaking her head. Do I strike you as the vacation type? She took a sip of water, her eyes scanning the city skyline. There's still work to do. Marcus nodded, his grin widening. Figured you'd say that. For the first time in a long time, Aaliyah felt a quiet sense of peace settle within her. Not just victory, but something deeper: justice, hard-won and undeniable. The war wasn't over, but this battle was hers, and she was ready for whatever came next. Marcus leaned back, a wry grin tugging at his lips as he swirled the glass in his hand. Didn't think you'd go for it, but figured I'd toss it out there anyway. He watched as Aaliyah set her bottle down with a soft clink, her eyes flicking toward him, sharp and unyielding. This isn't the end. Marcus, she said, her voice low but laced with steel. We took down Mason. We dragged Hargrove's dirty secrets into the light. But you and I both know that's just scratching the surface. There are others out there, more people pulling strings, bankrolling chaos, ruining lives for profit or power. If we walk away now, everything we've fought for, it's just a ripple in a storm. Marcus let out a heavy breath, his fingers brushing over the scruff of his beard. Knew you'd say something like that. His tone was gruff, but there was a glint of respect in his eyes. Aaliyah turned her gaze to the city sprawling below them, its lights flickering like a heartbeat. I can't turn my back on this, she said, almost to herself. Marcus shifted, leaning forward now, his voice softer but pointed. You could, no one would judge you. You've done more than anyone could have asked. Look at what you pulled up, Aaliyah. He gestured toward the skyline, the city that pulsed with secrets. A senator, a federal official, a whole criminal empire exposed. You didn't just win a battle, you changed the game. You made the untouchables flinch. Aaliyah's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers curling tightly around the armrest of her chair. And now we make sure they stay scared. Her words were a vow, quiet but unshakable. Marcus studied her for a long moment, the weight of her resolve settling between them. Then, with a slow nod, he said, "All right, what's the next move?" She drew in a deep breath, letting the question anchor her. We keep pushing forward. We keep digging. Hargrove wasn't the root of this, he was just a branch. If one corrupt official was funneling money to hate groups and gangs, there are others. If someone like Mason was willing to build an army for the right price, there's a line of people waiting to take his place. We hit them hard, before they can regroup, before they get clever. Marcus's grin returned, slower this time, tinged with a knowing edge. And by we, you're including me in this, aren't you? Aaliyah tilted her head, a spark of amusement in her eyes. You in, Marcus? He let out a deep, rumbling laugh, shaking his head. Hell yeah, I'm in. Someone's got to make sure your stubborn self doesn't get in over your head. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but her focus drifted back to the streets below, alive with the hum of a city that never slept. Then we start tomorrow. Marcus groaned, though his grin didn't fade. Should have known you'd say that. They stood in silence for a while, the city's rhythm washing over them. What they'd accomplished would ripple through the years, a seismic shift that the people below might not yet understand. Aaliyah had never chased glory or headlines. She wasn't the kind of hero the world liked to plaster on magazine covers. She was a tactician, a fighter, a woman who'd been underestimated one too many times, and that was her greatest weapon. The powerful had never seen her coming. Now, they'd never stop looking over their shoulders. She turned to Marcus, her voice steady as iron. We're not finished. He exhaled, his grin widening as he shook his head. Yeah, I figured. Aaliyah cast one final glance at the city, the distant wail of sirens, a reminder that peace was an illusion. As long as she had breath in her lungs, as long as there were shadows hiding predators who thought they were untouchable, she'd be there watching, waiting, striking. Some battles never ended, and Aaliyah Carter was only just beginning.